Well, folks, it's 1 o'clock Eastern Standard, 10 a.m. Pacific, and it's the third Wednesday. What does that mean? Let's Talk ERP is up. This time we've got Rusch. He's back. We loved him so much. He scared the heebie-jeebies out of us so much that he's come back to scare us even further. This is great. We're going to be talking about data breaches. We're talking about breach. Last time we spoke, Rick, with you all around cybersecurity and specifically ransomware. Now we're going to be talking this time around, and it's very timely because there's more than enough articles and news items that all are talking around data breaches. The Equifax. I've got an article here from the Hacker News. If you all go to thehackernews.com, there's an article right here from Sunday. Casino gets hacked through its internet-connected fish tank thermometer. Amazing. And Paul Ellis is an individual who put that out on LinkedIn and brought that to our attention. So we're all talking about data breaches, Rick. And again, thank you for joining us again. You, Rick, if for those who don't know, has 25 years of experience. He's helped multiple companies do research and select appropriate ERP accounting software for them. He's reorganized the new dangers of ransomware. He has been focusing on cybersecurity to help his clients guard their digital, what he calls digital data, and he's been speaking on cybersecurity now for over 3 years. Rick, thank you again for joining us on Let's Talk ERP.
Thank you, Javid, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever your time zone is. I really appreciate being here, and as we spoke last time, it was on regard to ransomware. You know, this time it's breaches, and so we'll see when we get into the presentation that they're slightly two different sides of the same coin, and obviously breaches are much more dangerous than ransomware, and it's in the news more, and that's because once your data has been released, a lot of the regulatory areas now require you to disclose that breach. If you get hit by ransomware and no data is lost, you're under no obligation to release that to the news and to the public. And so oftentimes ransomware gets covered up, whereas if you have a breach, now we've seen such as the Equifax, you know, it was months later, Uber had their breach, and they were a year before they came out and disclosed that they had a breach the year before. Now, there is a reason behind that, and oftentimes it's because whether you have a breach or not, it takes a forensics team to really determine if there was data taken, and that can take a long time and a lot of money to discern that. So, I want to go ahead and start the presentation here, and we're going to start it right off with a polling question once the system goes there. And here's
so we're going to have a few polling questions through our conversation today, folks, with Rick. First polling question is up on the screen, or it should be on the screen. But also, I just want to remind you, as we are going through this conversation with Rick, folks, you have an opportunity to ask questions. You simply got to go to the Ask Question area. I think it's the bottom right or somewhere around on your screen. You'll be able to see an area where you can ask a question. We're going to make sure we have enough time for Rick to answer your questions. So if you've got questions, chime into the conversation and do so. And by the way, we are recording this session, so you will get a recording of the session as a post follow-up along with a PDF version of Rick's slide deck. So please stay tuned, and we are always appreciative of everyone just commenting and sharing this with your community of networks in your social channels. So here's the first question we've got. Very simple. Did you attend the ransomware live webinar session we did back in January? Gosh, over almost 6 months ago. And let's see what we got. I'm trying to find there we go. We've got 40% saying yep. Half of you weren't, which is good, maybe, because then you can go back and you can watch the recorded version of the first one. And shame on you, 10%, who said you don't even pay attention. How dare you? Of a dapper guy like Rick Rusch, you wouldn't pay attention? How dare you?
Well,
So
that's
let's,
the nice thing about the recording is they can go back and rewatch that on something that, oftentimes when I'm sitting in a webinar, you get distracted, you get phone calls, and so it's tough to, commit that whole hour without being interrupted.
absolutely, Rick. That's the power of technology these days. You can hit a button these days and record. So let's start the conversation, Rick. You're going to help us avoid being that next company name on the national news, the local news when it comes to breach. Over to you.
And that's the goal. Is I hope what people walk away from this presentation is this isn't an impossibility. This can be done even with minimal resources. So I don't, and one of the reasons that we give away this checklist is because it has all the different protections that can be utilized. Now I'm only going to cover the top 3 that I think cover breaches. Now, if they go back and they watch the ransomware, I tried to cover the top 3 items or security protections that I felt are really necessary to prevent ransomware, and some overlap and some don't. So, but at the end of the webinar, people are going to be asked to do a seminar, a survey. So if they check the box, they'll get not only this checklist, but they'll get weekly cybersecurity tips. And those are really, they're not geared to IT people. Les and I were talking about this yesterday, and they're rudimentary for IT people. But if you are not involved in IT, they're good information. I've gotten good feedback on those and really encourage people. It's not a sales pitch. They're things to look for, things to inform yourself about for cybersecurity. We're going to do a quick overview, and especially this is for the 50% that didn't make it to the ransomware. But we're going to go through this pretty fast, so hang on, listen fast. So the threat is new, but it's the same old goal, and these are criminals, and their goal is easy money. They're thieves. So the easy mark, it's a profitable criminal business enterprise, and it's a low risk, high reward type of event. Now with a breach, ransomware, you know right away when you have ransomware because you get a ransom note. A breach is the complete opposite. Their goal is to stay hidden, to gather information that they can sell or exploit, and they stay longer, and the average is over 200 days before they're found. 200 days is a long time. That's more than half a year, and to avoid detection and the protection. So when we look at the criminal enterprise, it's really broken down into 2 pieces, which is automated, which is what the ransomware, is. It's an automated process to steal money. So, and that comes in keyboard loggers. The new thing this year is crypto mining. If anybody has a question about crypto mining, ask me about that. Whereas hacking, the breach, that's manually breaking into a company, which is very labor intensive, and it's done by hackers and hacktivists. But that's a labor intensive process to get into somebody's system. Now, if we look back, 12, 15 years ago, these were the number of breaches for 30,000 records and up. And so you can basically count them on 2 hands. Now, since that time, malware has just exploded, and now we're getting close to 1 million new pieces of malware every day that helps them to break in through breaches or ransomware, various methods. And this is what the breaches look like today. Now, if you look in the very top corner next to the 2017, there's a B there, and I think that sounds for Bell, and I think that's Canadian Bell. But as you can see, I mean, this is just crazy. And Javed, you mentioned that it's in the news almost every day, and those are the big breaches. Those aren't the little ones that happen probably every day.
Yeah, you know what? As a matter of fact, Rick, we did in our company page on LinkedIn, if you're watching and you have a chance to just jump over to LinkedIn on our company page, you are right, Rick. Bell Canada, up here in Canada, did go through a breach, and there's a great article from the Globe and Mail there for you to take. Oh, look at that. We didn't even practice this. Wow, we got to take this show on the road. There's that article that you all can go, and we've actually shared that as part of our communications through our LinkedIn company. So thanks for bringing that to our attention, Rick. Thanks.
My pleasure. You know, it is becoming commonplace. I mean, I had so many headlines that I could grab, and I just decided, you know what, I'm not going to grab any of them because everybody's probably seen them. But I did want to highlight, you know, the costs behind the breaches. And for Canada, they did a study, and the average cost is 6.3 million or 6.03 million. That is significant, and that's not unusual. The underwriters, of Canadian underwriters, I mean, they did a study. They found that those costs are escalating. They're highest in Canada. And then the U.S., there's a insurance company that follows the statistics. And there's in the U.S., it's 7.3 million, and it's rising every single year. And this is a problem that's not going to go away. So it does need to be addressed. And one of the biggest questions I get is, well, how do these breaches start? Well, Forrester did a study several years ago, and they found it starts with us, the employees. You know, if the employees click on a malicious email, if they are download free software that they can listen to music, that caused this person's nightmare. He was the business owner of LabMD, and one of his employees wanted to listen to music. She downloaded a file share for music. Well, what she didn't count on and didn't tell the IT when she downloaded it, hey, that opened up their network to a third party that jumped in, saw it was open, and then tried to blackmail the owner. Unfortunately, or fortunately, he told him to go pound sand, and the third party then turned him over to the federal government here in the U.S., and the federal government fined him a huge amount of money because he was in a regulatory environment for medical. He tried to fight the fines and in indicating that that he had found no area where the data had really been escaped other than this one third party. But the problem was that the damage was done, and now he's out of business. The really sad part of this is his own employees were mad at him for just not settling with the government and just moving on. They're mad at him for trying to take a stand, and it's you get damned if you do and damned if you don't. And the sad fact is you don't get the victim status that often we do when we're the victim of a crime when you get breached. And we saw that with the CFO of Equifax. Now he's being prosecuted for insider trading, but we don't feel sorry for these people when they get breached, especially when it's our data. Right, Javed?
No, absolutely. You know, what's interesting about the music share, so how does that impact on people who are listening to music through things like iTunes or Spotify? Are you suggesting perhaps that those could be breached even while we're listening to those, even perhaps at home or at work?
No, these are specific to if I want to share, like if I have a Beatles album and I want to share it. So I share it from my computer and you want to listen to Beatle music. So you join the same network and you share, your favorite album. And so we can see each other's files. The problem was she had this share on the network and it opened up the network that, anybody could remote in through that access, because that opened a port on their firewall and they could have access to the network. And the problem was, okay, if she had gone to the IT and said, hey, I want to listen to music, what can I do? They would have given her iTunes or something else that would have been secure, that would not have opened up the network to the bad guys. So the cautionary tale is, if you want to install something on your company network, don't do so without the blessing of the IT department or the outside IT.
Got it. Okay, good. I just want to make that clear, just so people I was listening to that thinking, oh, well, I'm always on Spotify quite a bit, or iTunes or something like that. I just want to make sure that perhaps is not applicable to something like this.
No, that's not applicable to this. This was specific to people sharing amongst themselves.
Got it.
I forget what the old file share.
That was the Napster days, right? The Napster days. I remember the good old Napster days where you could do file share.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm a pretty young guy. I'm not that old. I'm pretty young. Yeah.
And if you notice, I know it's hard to see on the video, but the T-shirt behind me says 99 problems, but a breach ain't one. And that's one of our cybersecurity vendors. They had that shirt, and I thought that was great.
Yeah, I love that shirt. I thought you were giving those away today. That would be amazing. Maybe next time.
Maybe next time.
Maybe next time.
Well, one of the ways that the breaches are opened up is through stolen credentials, and these are not credentials that are stolen from you yourself, but often from third parties that you utilize their websites. An example is LinkedIn or Facebook or Dropbox. Those companies have all had breaches, and they steal your logins to get into those locations, and then they utilize those logins, assuming that you've reused a password to get onto your internal network. And 81% of hacking breaches start with those stolen or very weak passwords. So one of the things that we try to encourage people is to develop stronger passwords, use a password manager, those sorts of things. But people are going to be people, and without really them understanding why we want to do that, it's hard to get them to change. And now we're ready for polling question number 2.
Okay, so here we go. What does your IT, and if you have a department or an IT individual, actively do to protect against a breach? This shall be interesting to see. I'm hoping people don't say I don't know, but we'll find out.
Yeah, I'm really hoping for one of the other selections, but I felt like I had to put in the I don't know, because oftentimes.
I'm really hoping people are not selecting I don't know. I'm really hoping that that's not an option. Uh-oh, I'm looking at the results coming in. Do you think, Rick, this is becoming or going to become more of a trend really a negative trend in 2018, 19, and 20? Like, and I say negative trend meaning from your, because you're very experienced in this, do you think that we're going to start seeing more and more articles online, news feeds about organizations being breached?
Well, I think you'll continue to see the organizations being breached because they have to make that public, and if it bleeds, it leads. So the news is all about distributing that information and alerting the public. The only thing I can hope from those is that companies are going to have to change their attitude towards IT in general, that it's not just a sunk cost, it's not just a necessary evil, that we have a job to do as well, just as the accounting department and the audit department have, they're a necessary byproduct of a company being public, and they have to have typically an audit group to make sure that they're compliant and regulatory and ethical as well. And I think you're going to see the same kind of rise up in cybersecurity within probably a subset of the IT department. But I think eventually it's going to be its own department, cybersecurity.
Well, I got some good news and I got some bad news. The good news is we've got people who are actively taking the poll. The bad news is we got 50% of the folks right now who are saying, I don't know. So this can be a positive in terms of an opportunity. 25% of you out there have indicated that security training is another option. And I got about 17% who said that it's made us compliant with PCI, NIST, ISO, or any other regulatory, and a very small 8% are saying nothing, we've never been asked about it. So there's some opportunity for you folks today, and this is a good thing, news for you, that you're here listening and watching Rick talk about data breaches. We're going to be recording this. We are recording this session, so please share it amongst your team, your staff, your leadership team, because clearly, as per Rick, this is becoming a more common thing on our news feed. And Rick made a bold prediction here that at some point down the road, there are going to be companies who maybe already have not done so, who are going to have departments called cybersecurity. I would think, Rick, big financial institutions already have this at this point, correct?
And they do, but a lot of times it's a part of the IT, or it's a subset of some other department. And I think, one of the questions that I was asked at one time was, how do we get I'm on a board of directors, and how do we know that what our outside cybersecurity firm is telling us is true, that we need this product and this item and this over here? And I said, put somebody on your board that's not related to your vendors, that knows cybersecurity, that's an expert, and they can discern what's BS and what's not, and determine that for the board of directors. The problem is they're running blind right now because they don't know how to address the problem.
Okay, let's keep going. Just looking at the time, we want to give enough time to answer any questions. So the mic is back over to you, Rick.
All right. Well, we covered ransomware in January, but this just came out in April, that ransomware is now a mode of breaching a company either through the ransomware or as a cover-up to cover the breach. Once a company's been breached, they'll release ransomware, and it's a kind of a smoke screen to cover up their, it's almost like setting a fire when you've broken in someplace and you steal something and then you set a fire to cover your tracks, and they're utilizing ransomware to do that. That's why this has jumped up so much. Now, I showed this slide back in January, but I think it's still just as relevant today. The FBI Cyber Division Deputy Assistant Director said, we're losing the war. These are not the things that we've been trained to deal about and think about. So, and that's one of the reasons I'm trying to get out and speak and get awareness so that, you know, we can overcome this and become protected. And if you got, you know, if the people watching, if you're small and you think, hey, we are not under attack, they're targeting Target and the big boys. And that you could not be more wrong. I can show you the statistics. The data does not hold that that's the case. The cyber threat is huge, and it's huge for small business because the criminals are going after low-hanging fruit, and that's small businesses that don't have the protections that they really need to fight off these attacks. This survey, most breaches are in less than an hour, and they found that was most prevalent in food, hospitality, and manufacturing sectors, which I suspect are some of the people watching today. So why do they do it? What are they breaking in? Well, it's to feed the black market on different details, credit cards, and they can even buy fake ATMs, and that's happened here in the U.S. quite prevalently, here in the Indianapolis city itself. So, you know, all these things are bought and traded and on the black market on the dark web, and it's a business. It's a criminal enterprise. Now, I don't know what the regulatory issues are in all of our viewers, but I know for the state of Indiana, if you have a breach, you have got to, and it's a confirmed breach, and I say that because when you have a cybersecurity incident, you don't call it a breach until you've determined that data has left the building. But there are significant fines and regulatory requirements on disclosure that go along with a breach. So, you know, getting to the bottom line, you've got to take action to harden your defenses. And that's what I want to try to cover the rest of the 10-15 minutes before we get to questions is what are my top 3 things that I recommend to solve the problem, to harden those defenses that you have. Now, I'm assuming that everybody listening, if they're a business, they have a firewall, they have antivirus on their endpoints, that they have an IT firm that's doing monitoring and patching. So if we go beyond those kind of baseline items, you know, security training. Remember back at the beginning, employees are the #1 way that breaches start. And so you've got to implement security training for your employees. Data encryption. If a company's data is encrypted and they are breached and that encryption is still valid, they don't, typically here in the US, they don't even have to report that the breach occurred because no data was lost that was not encrypted. And for HIPAA regulations, that's a safe harbor if you have the data encrypted and it's lost. Now, a lot of people are probably not familiar with this term, and it's pronounced SIM. Some people pronounce it SIEM, but I pronounce it SIM. And it's a Security Information Event Manager or Management. And we'll kind of describe this in just a little bit more detail. But here's polling question number 3 on people's security training.
All right, so this is the third of the three. Last one, basically, within the last 12 months, how much security training? So we're now talking, folks, about training. Have you received? Is it 30 minutes or less, 31 minutes or to 2 hours, more than 2 hours, but less than monthly training or awareness, and weekly training. So give us sort of a flavor, folks, of the frequency of training that you have had when it comes to specifically data breach. And by the way, as I, some of you know that Les Hoffman from Phoenix Systems and we worked together here at Phoenix Systems, and he was doing a quick search, guys like king of searches. So I just wanted to bring you up to date with your comment, Rick, about Canada. And we will post this today on our company feed. So if you are not following our company, folks, please follow Phoenix Systems company page on LinkedIn. And we are going to post this feed that I just am reading from Osler, the law firm. And the title states clearly, mandatory new Canadian data breach obligations expected to take effect in 2018. I'll read the first sentence only. Strict new Canadian security breach and notification requirements are expected to be finalized and come into force during 2018. The requirements will impose new notice requirements in the event of a, quote, breach of security safeguards, end quote, for organizations regulated by the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, otherwise known as PIPEDA, and corresponding new record-keeping requirements. So we will post this on our LinkedIn company page right when we are done with you through today. Rick, thanks for bringing that to our attention. So there's an update. Now let's look at our results. We have, we've got, 86%, which is good. 86% of people who have or are taking training that is 30 minutes or less, a mere 17%, 31 or less, no one more than 2 hours, and only about 7% who said monthly training or awareness. What do you think, Rick? Is this in line with your experience, or you thinking this should be even more?
With the studies that have been done, the studies that have been done typically identify that 30 minutes or less a year, employees are trained on security, and obviously that is not sufficient for security to being aware and to really heighten their awareness about phishing attacks and things like that. So that's right in line with what I found. I found all sorts of articles on training that workers lack cybersecurity awareness that actually puts businesses at work at risk. And now this article I found shows a 50 times yearly return on investment on cybersecurity training. So now I kind of read that and I kind of chuckle, because it's very difficult to get a return on investment on prevention. And that's really the issue. You can think of it like fire prevention. You can spend money on prevention training for your employees, fire extinguishers, smoke alarms, all sprinkler systems. But how do you determine the return on investment if you don't have a fire? And it's similar with cybersecurity training. But I do bring that up in that I'm hoping companies really look at training as something to implement, because that's going to be one of the best ways that they can prevent a breach in the first place, is to keep somebody from clicking on those phishing and malware-based emails. And
so Rick, let me ask you then, what are some of the things from your experience that people should be cognizant of if they suspect it's a phishing email? Because we get this a lot, right? Well, I know I've seen some where I'll see an email come in and I'll look at it kind of sort of slight-handed, because it looks like it's coming from a reputable source like a bank. But then you look at it further and you realize, I've been told, first thing is look at the URL, look at the link, look at what it says in the link. Can you provide just some real quick tips that, oh my God, look, like you're like the rock star of rock stars. So sorry, I'm totally taking the thunder away. So I shall not speak ever again.
I often got the question, and I wrote a
Yeah,
blog about it, and so I'm basically pulling this right from my blog.
there you
Uh,
go.
you know, and it's basically, you aren't the recipient. In other words, it's very generic, especially from a company you don't use. Now, I got a phishing email this morning from the IRS saying that it was final notice before I would be issued an arrest warrant and so forth and so on. Well, the IRS doesn't send anything like that through through email. It's always through registered mail. Vague or general information about you, the account holder, well, they have all your information about you, so they should be able to identify you and not just say, dear friend, dear customer, dear recipient, etc. And sometimes they'll have a malicious link in the email. Sometimes they'll have an attachment. You have to even be concerned if it looks like it's coming from your friend. Don't just immediately click on it, especially if it's got an attachment, or if they're vague, they don't address you specifically other than, hey, Rick, I thought you would find this interesting. Well,
So Rick, what do you mean when you say malicious link? What am I looking for specifically in order for me as an individual identify that, aha, that looks like a malicious link? What are we looking for? Are we looking for something in the HTTP, that area? Like, what are we looking for in order to identify that as a malicious link so we don't click on that link?
Well, always be suspect. If you're getting a link in an email and you're not expecting it from the individual or from the company, always be suspect. If it's coming from a company, let's say I have a Target credit card or a frequent buyer card, and they send me something and say, hey, we think your account has been attacked. We want you to click on this link and verify your information to stop the attack. Don't click on the link in the email. Go directly to the web page that you normally go to log in for your card that's associated with that. You skip the email. You go in and you log in, and oftentimes if there's an issue that they have with your account, they will tell you as soon as you log in, or call the phone number and not from the email, but from the site that you go to all the time. So now if it's a company you don't use, well, then you just delete it and you're done. Now I have seen emails from UPS or FedEx, and I was actually expecting a package, and so I had to stop and look. If the link doesn't go back to the company, then you should be suspicious. Now, I'm going to put a caveat on that. In our emails that we send through a marketing company called Infusionsoft. So in our weekly cybersecurity tips, in our monthly newsletters, the links in there don't actually go to our company site because they're Infusionsoft marketing links. But I always try to put the entire link that if they're concerned, they can copy and paste to bypass that, if they have any concerns. Any attachments to these any of these emails, if you aren't expecting an attachment, I would not open it unless I verified. If it's coming from an individual I know, I'll pick up the phone and say, hey, did you send me this attachment? I wasn't really expecting anything. Be suspicious and assume the worst and verify. Here's an example of a malicious email, and we've highlighted the faulty information in it, and they put in 2 zeros instead of 2 O's in the domain of the email. And as part of the security training that we do, phishing examples are done. you get a test for the annually, and you get micro tests on a weekly basis to really keep and hammer home those trainings that you get, so that it's not just 30 minutes a year. Okay, encryption. Hopefully everybody is familiar with what encryption is, but it basically just converts your data into an unreadable form unless you have a decryption code to enable to use it. Now, it's a double-edged sword. It has to be managed. It does increase the file access time, but the pros outweigh the cons significantly on this. It won't actually prevent ransomware from occurring. Now, it might diminish the impact of the ransomware, but it will prevent a breach as long as your encryption keys are protected. Now we get to the SIM. What is a SIM? What is it doing? Okay, all the computers in the company, the servers, the firewall, they all generate logs. And these logs track everything that's going on. And what a SIM does, because these can be millions and millions of data points or log information, that it's almost impossible for a person to try to look through and analyze. And so what a SIM does is it boils it down so that, instead of having to look at 120 million log entries, boils it down to where it will send me 18 notifications that look kind of suspicious based on behavior and other items. So, and the reason this is becoming more and more important than in the old days is, firewalls and antivirus, they work great against known threats, brute force attacks, things like that. But what they aren't real good about is when it says compromised remote access, that means somebody hacking in using somebody's valid credentials. And that's the stolen password type of issue. Ransomware, it's some of the antivirus are finally coming around to recognizing ransomware and those types of attack, but it's very difficult. And so we utilize Event Tracker as our SIM. And one of the reasons we like it is because for those companies that are regulatory minded, it checks all the boxes and helps them to be protected in a more regulatory driven environment like HIPAA or for the different SOX, GLBA, all the different alphabet soups. I just got a couple more slides, but just want to hit home. I brought this up in January, but Robert Hershevek is a known cybersecurity expert in Toronto. And somebody asked him, well, what about companies that think they're too small to be attacked? And he said, well, lack of proper monitoring causes tremendous damage, and those companies have got to think differently about their cybersecurity. Like I said, just like fire protection, and it's almost more needed in some cases, because I asked some companies, when was the last time you had a fire? Oh, we never have. In 20 years I've been here. And lastly, I want to touch on some myths that CEOs believe about security. I want to touch on this. If anybody is a CEO or running a company, see if these hit home for you. And if not, take these to your CEO and ask them, if what they think. One of the myths is that attackers can't be stopped. they can, and they are. I mean, it's like the T-shirt said, breaches has not been a problem, because we do all the things that try to keep our clients protected. That IT security knows what needs to be fixed, and oftentimes they don't. They're just basically holding a shotgun and just firing away, because they haven't done the investigation to see where their gaps are. That patching is under control. I can't tell you the number of places I go into and patches are not being done on the computers. And one of the biggest hacks are from these old 3 years or more patches that haven't been done. And that employee security training is currently adequate. As we saw from our survey, 85% are getting 30 minutes or less. It's not enough. It really has to be monthly, if not weekly, training. And what this author said, I really agree with. Go back and ask your IT, what's our biggest threat? And where is your data to support that conclusion? And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Javid, for questions.
Great, Rick. Thank you. We've got a few questions, and I wanted to ask you from your perspective. You talked about the 6 myths CEOs are speaking about. Can you provide? You mentioned before a top 3 list, but give me a sort of a top 3 list of things the attendees today can action on, and they can pick either one of the 3 or all 3 that they can action on right away. What would be that top 3 list that you would suggest the attendees write down and then circle one that they can action like within 24 to 48 hours?
One, I would say follow Phoenix Systems, follow their company LinkedIn or Facebook, become a follower. Watch those. I notice Phoenix Systems oftentimes posts things that's of interest. They are more than welcome to follow me on either our company page on Facebook or LinkedIn. We post things there all the time. Javid knows quite well that I'm oftentimes posting things, and you can't assume that somebody else is going to do it. You have to become aware of it and become aware of within your own company of what your security items are. Go to your IT department, ask, what are we doing, especially if you're the business owner, what are we doing to prevent ransomware? What are we doing to prevent breaches? And hold their feet to the fire and have them say, okay, this is how we're doing it. This is why we're spending that money. This is the data we've accumulated on why we feel these threats are of paramount importance that we need to prevent. And I wanted
What do you think, Rick, what do you think a security training program looks like?
It should be a combination. It's not just a newsletter that they read once a month. It should be audio, it should be visual, it should be frequent. They should get simulated phishing attacks so that they learn to recognize what those are. One of the reasons I like our security training is that it actually gives employees a security awareness quotient, almost like a credit report. So it identifies employees that are on the ball. You're not going to have to worry too much about them clicking on the phishing items, but it points to the employees that maybe need some remedial advice on and some additional training.
All right, so I've got a question, Rick. It's another Rick who's asking, are the slides this video webinar available. Absolutely, Rick. You will get a follow-up communication, and we will have the PDF version of the slides with regards to the checklist. That is part of our follow-up note to everyone, asking if you would like to receive the checklist, and then you've got to go into some level of a consent point where you got to give us the consent, and we'll get you the checklist. So Rick, the other Rick, yes, we've been recording this throughout this session, so it is. Got a question here also, Rick, for you. How can I tell if anyone is attempting to break in to our network? What are some of the areas of notice that people should be aware of that would identify they're breaking into a network?
Well, this is the insidious part, Javed. With a ransomware, like I said, if you're being attacked, you know it right away because you get a ransom note. Depending on how good these guys are, you won't notice at all. Your IT won't notice at all. That's why they will sit on your network for up to, and the average is over 200 days. That's half a year. The statistics are that the internal IT rarely find this to be the problem. Now, I think that's starting to turn around as companies are paying more attention. But the problem is their goal is not to be found, not to cause any problems whatsoever. Now, one of the big things that's hit this year is called crypto mining. And that you will actually see occurring on your network if your computers are running hot, if the fan speed is running maximum all the time and you're not really doing anything. You know, that could identify that somebody's broken in and they're using your computers to crypto mine. It would take too long to go through exactly what that is, but basically they're utilizing your computers for their evil deeds, and it maxes out and burns out the computer chips. And one of the things with this checklist, you know, as you can see, you go through, you check. In 1 minute, you're going to know what you have and what gaps you have. You check mark what you have, you circle what you don't, and you know right away what you need to work on. And then be sure and check the box yes to get the cyber security tips.
The other questions, if there's any other questions, please type them in. We've got a few more minutes left with our good friend Rick. I've got another one here that I wanted to read out. Is there really any sign that I can look for that's an indication that we've been hacked? What are some of the signs?
There's really no signs. You know, I've had companies that have had ransomware attacks that they weren't sure if they had been hacked or if it was just a ransomware. And they weren't sure if they had data that actually left the company. You have to hire a forensics team to come in and look at those logs that identified through the SIM. You know, that's what going back to this. That's what the SIM does. Is it looks at all the activity and boils it down to identify what's abnormal on your network. And that's one of the reasons that we've kind of added the SIM as one of those top three, because unless your IT company is very diligent, they're looking at your firewall logs, they're looking at your server logs, and they're trying to find a needle in a haystack, it's very difficult to find that needle that says, hey, we've been hacked. That's why some of these companies, they don't find it for months down the road. And then finally something that they've come across and they go, oh my gosh. And then they try to backtrack to figure out, well, when did this occur? And it's months.
Okay, great. Couple of things just for last minute. We have a couple of minutes left, so just want to remind you folks, we're going to be posting a few things on our Phoenix Systems company page. I referred to that Osler article about the regulation in 2018, so we'll be posting that on our LinkedIn feed very, very I would say a few minutes or so after we sign off today. Plus, we'll post, we're going to be posting the recorded webinar, live webinar that we just did today with everyone who has registered. You will get that, and please feel free to share amongst your community. Rick, are there any last minute insights that you want to share before we sign off for today's Let's Talk ERP? Folks, next week we're going to take a little hiatus. We won't have one for next month. That is just going to be a little hiatus. We're going to regroup, and we'll be back live on the third Wednesday of June. So we'll see you then. But Rick, any last minute insights that you can help our viewers take away from today's conversation?
Follow Phoenix Systems on their social feeds. Follow us on our social feeds. You will learn a lot, but that's the CEO myth that I agree with profoundly is it can be prevented. If you've got the right partners and they're doing the due diligence that they should to keep you protected.
Okay, one last quick question. What about those organizations who are watching this and saying, well, should I be asking my IT guy? Should I have them involved more? How do we get the IT folks or outsourcing companies involved in a situation and certainly a topic area like this?
Well, I mean, if they're already utilizing an IT person, they should be involved and they should be asked, what are we doing right now to prevent ransomware, breaches, cybersecurity protection. And if they say, oh, we're doing all these things, say, okay, how have you decided what we do and what we don't do? Have that discussion and try to get a business conversation going around how do we solve this problem? The problem is, how do we stay protected within our budget? So involve the IT, involve your outside IT. If the only time you hear from your IT is when you call them when there's a problem, that's not going to work anymore. It has to be more proactive because somebody's got to be looking at those logs to determine whether there's abnormal activity going on.
Rick, it's always been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us again today on Let's Talk ERP. Just a reminder, folks, the session has been recorded. We will be providing the recording to those folks who've registered today. It'll come to you via email. Also, we will be having the post that we talked about. We are taking a hiatus, so we won't be doing a Let's Talk ERP in May. We'll come back in June, and we'll be introducing some new guests in the future. Rick, it's always a pleasure. It's when I'm looking at my time here. It is, what do we got? Almost 1 minute to 2, so this is great. 1 hour of great conversation with you, Rick. Thank you again for being on Let's Talk ERP, and we will certainly see you sometime near the future and on the internet.
Thank you, Javed, and thank you, Phoenix Systems. And anybody can reach out to me. You saw my contact information. Don't hesitate to reach out and ask me questions. Thanks, guys.
Thanks again, Rick. Thanks. Enjoy the day, guys. Bye for now.